So we're here with Vivek Kundra, and I want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Vivek is currently the Executive Vice President for Industries with Salesforce.com, which is a very prominent cloud provider, of course. But previously, you were the first CIO for the United States government, which is a very significant role and one in which you were able to drive a fair bit of change in an organization that's not really known for that. So we were very keen to hear about your experiences and some of the tips that you have for people that are trying to do the same thing in the public sector. Probably a good place to start is if you talk a bit about your role as CIO and how that came to be. Clearly, you had previously had some technology leadership roles at different levels of government, and then you were able to drive up to a very senior position. How did that come about?
Well, when President Obama came to the White House, one of his chief priorities was to drive technology, innovation, and government reform within the U.S. government as part of his administration. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the transition team that he had put in place. And we thought about four big areas that we would focus on to make sure that the United States government was creating value for the American people. One was in terms of managing the $80 billion. So it's responsible for making sure that $80 billion in IT investments were producing dividends every dollar that was spent. Number two was around making sure that the government was moving toward innovative technologies that would fundamentally change the citizen experience. Three, around cybersecurity and making sure that security was central to how government operations were operating. And then, of course, the fourth big area was to make sure that we're creating a more open, transparent, and participatory democracy. So those four big areas were the agenda that we drove within the administration.
You don't often get the opportunity to reinvent government at that level. Were you able to bring much from your previous roles? You had obviously worked in Washington, D.C. previously and Virginia as well in different types of IT roles. Could you bring some?
Sure. So I was very fortunate in life that I had served, in my first role at county government. It's as local as it gets, and really focus on issues that touch people every single day, from schools to the police department to libraries to the work that happens with the roads. And from there, I had the opportunity to serve at the state level as the Assistant Secretary of Commerce and Technology, and contending with issues such as globalization. And what does it mean when an entire economy in the state of Virginia is transitioning from tobacco industry and coal mining industry to the information economy, and really had the opportunity to focus on job creation and the tech economy. And then I had the opportunity to serve at the city level. So that was working in the city of Washington, D.C., working on public policy issues and using technology from everything from public safety to making sure that the citizens in Washington, D.C. had the opportunity to compete in a global economy, reinventing the education system and the classroom there. And those experiences were critical to my thinking as I came into the White House, because I was close to the customer, which was the citizen. And I always knew who I worked for. Very, very focused around technology and how it serves the American people rather than an abstract concept.
That certainly would have guided you very clearly. Now, you came into the role as CIO for the entire country, basically, and certainly in terms of setting that strategy. And you developed a 25-point plan. That's not the kind of thing that usually flies very well in a bureaucracy like Washington. How did you push that through and really get some traction with that?
Well, worked very closely with the House and the Senate, and also with CIOs across the federal government, every major agency from the Department of Defense to Health and Human Services to the Department of Transportation. And we said very clearly, what is the future, right? The future is not around building more technology infrastructure. The U.S. government went from 432 data centers to over 2,000 in less than a decade. And the tragedy was that the utilization of those data centers was horrific. You basically saw utilization numbers that were wasting money when it comes to taxpayer dollars. And we decided to say, look, we're going to shut down 40% of the data centers, move toward cloud computing, drive greater innovation for the American people, and make sure that what we were doing is we were putting citizens at the heart of government operations. And the 25-point plan was designed to move the government more aggressively, not only to save taxpayer dollars, but also create this open, transparent, and participatory democracy. The ability to make sure that everybody understood and we put in action very, very specific initiatives that would open up government data, that would allow citizens to be watchdogs, but also innovators on top of that government data, that would actually allow us to be able to go out there and engage people in the public policy process. We recognize that Washington did not have a monopoly on the best thinking and the best ideas, and the default setting for most governments has been closed, secretive, and opaque. And we wanted to switch that to be open, transparent, and participatory. And I think it comes down to execution. Really, really making sure that launching initiatives like the IT dashboard, where you take the picture of every major CIO in the United States government, put it online, put the IT projects that they were responsible for, so you could actually see how are we performing in terms of cost, how are we performing in terms of schedule, how are we performing in terms of metrics that were committed to when the budget was allocated. And just the sheer act of launching that dashboard allowed us to follow through on projects that were behind schedule, over budget, and we saved $3 billion in under 6 months.
That's certainly a significant achievement. Now, that dashboard is a bit of a legendary story because there's a picture in a lot of circles of the president who's sitting down and looking through it. And I think any CIO might be thinking that they can languish in obscurity and do what they're doing, but when they know that the president's watching, it certainly changes the dynamic. Do you think that if that picture hadn't happened, if he hadn't taken the time to look there and people didn't know that he was watching, do you think he would have had the same success?
Well, the president, it was very clear, right? The president cared about technology, was very, very focused on making sure that the government was moving in a direction that was in the interest of the American people. And the fact that the president took the time to look at the IT dashboard, I still remember the day when we walked him, through it and took the picture. And I remember putting that in my blog, and immediately I got calls from CIOs, and they said, "Oh my God, I just got a call from my cabinet secretary who I haven't met with for years. And for the first time, my cabinet secretary is asking me, why is this project red?" Right? That spirit of shining a bright light on government operations and having leadership looking at performance enabled us to save billions of dollars. And not only that, but it also held the private sector accountable for the services that they're providing to the government, to make sure that CEOs we're now all of a sudden looking at this picture and saying, oh my God, which technology projects are red that we have a contract for? And so it was a very, very powerful model around, if you think about it in the context of behavioral economics, right? Moving behavior as a result of just shining light.
Certainly, what is it, shining a light under a bushel or something? It's certainly, you're bringing a lot of things out that maybe some people might or might not want to see, but it's very important that you do. Another one in that vein was the big data, the open data effort that you've put in to really get large quantities of government data out and available for the public. When you look back at that from your new role, I mean, you certainly helped start a movement, and the idea really now is that government disclosure of data and sharing of data is almost a default position. And even 4 years ago, it wasn't. It very much wasn't. How do you see your legacy in that respect?
Well, I think what was really, really informative about that initiative is I remember when I came into DC government at the local level, we made a decision and we decided to say, look, why aren't we releasing credit card data as government employees are buying stuff with their credit cards? Why isn't the default that it's open? Why isn't it just transparent? Why couldn't the residents of the District of Columbia actually see where's their money going? And so that sparked a really, really interesting model that I didn't even think it would be as successful as it was. So we opened up this data at the DC government level, but then I launched this competition called Apps for Democracy and challenged developers to build applications on top of this open data. And I still remember that within 30 days, we saw 47 amazing applications that were built on top of the DC data. And not only that, we had spent about $50,000 on that. And we'd gotten value for millions of dollars, right? Because you had all these people that had not worked in government, that didn't know this complicated, convoluted government procurement process, but were just innovative. They created those apps. So it was natural at the federal level. When we launched data.gov, I remember we started with 47 data sets. And today there are over 400,000 different data sets in every aspect of government operations, from Medicare, Medicaid data in the healthcare space, to data around inspections and performance as far as cars are concerned, to data that has to do with education outcomes. And then what we did, which was super exciting, is we worked with Congress and the America Competes Act to hardwire in legislation the ability to issue challenges and prizes up to $50 million for each government agency. So opening up data, making it available to the public, not only does it allow the public to be watchdogs to fight corruption, but it also allows entrepreneurs to build the next multi-billion-dollar companies. There's an entrepreneur who built a company called Brightscope that allows people in the 401k plans or retirement plans to be able to plan better. And then you had another entrepreneur who built a company that allowed you to compare outcomes when it comes to healthcare. Before you were checked into a hospital, you could say, well, if I'm getting a knee surgery, what is a positive outcome in this hospital versus another one? What is the mortality rate in this hospital? What is the cost in this hospital versus another one? So that enables you to make much, much better decisions, but it also allows you to improve operations, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector.
And certainly a lot of this data existed. It was just a question of opening it and improving the utilization of it and really encouraging people to innovate in ways that
absolutely, right? And taxpayers have already paid for that data. And so why wouldn't you make it available for free, open, in a platform, API-driven, and allow innovators to build amazing applications, whether it's at the federal or central government level, state level, or local level. And I think that's where you're going to see a huge shift in terms of where innovation is going to come from. It's going to be at the intersection of multiple data sets. And those data sets can be government data sets or private sector data sets. But I think you're beginning to see these multi-billion-dollar companies that are going public as a result of using data that's coming out of whether it's government or private sector data.
Certainly puts a new slant on the old idea of government by the people and for the people, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And now you have government as a platform.
Very, very true. So you went from there and moved to the private sector. It was certainly a move that was noted in the industry, and certainly I think people felt that you had really accomplished a lot as a CIO at that level. Now you're in Salesforce, and in many ways you're living a lot of the things that you were talking about as a CIO. We've got a very strong cloud platform, a lot of applications, a lot of innovation being built on top of that. What were you able to take from your CIO times and the knowledge and experience that you had gained there to really bring something new to the role that you're in now?
So actually, after the White House, I went on a fellowship and it reflected on what is the future of computing, where is society headed. And what was really, really interesting about that is that Salesforce.com as a company is at the vanguard of that around this third wave of computing. So I thought a lot about what was going on in the 1960s, where you had nation states or capitals around the world that could afford really, really expensive mainframes and mini computers and SNN networks, and you had thousands of users that were on those networks. And that was sort of the first wave of computing. And then you move into the 1980s, and you suddenly get this second wave of computing with client-server environments and LAN-WAN networks, and you get millions of users on these networks. But what's so exciting, and one of the reasons I think this third wave of computing is going to disrupt every major industry and country for that matter, is because in this third wave with cloud, social, mobile, LTE networks, all of a sudden, if you reflect on that, you and I, with our mobile device, have more power in our hands than world leaders did a couple of years ago, right? The ability to ask and get an answer to virtually any question, the ability to click on a button and you could have a car show up to pick you up, the ability to control your thermostat from this mobile device, no matter where you live on the planet, the ability to instrument your health, the ability to actually connect with people all over the world. It's so transformative, and what you're seeing is something that we haven't seen for over 100 years when it comes to this shift in technology. And what's really, really interesting about that, though, by the way, is that it's not just a function of the technology, but it's these twin forces around globalization and this third wave of computing that's going to transform every company, every government that we know of.
It certainly has gotten momentum over the past few years. I mean, initially cloud was something that, particularly in the government sector, was viewed with a bit of suspicion and a lot of fear and a lot of concern about change and a lot of concern about reworking the structures that were working, for better or worse. Do you think that we are well and truly past that by now? Is cloud in the public sector to the point where it has the legitimacy that it should, or do we need to continue?
Well, you just have to go back to the mid-90s, right? And if you remember in the mid-90s, a lot of people were complaining about or worried about launching a website, right? In the United States, for example, it took the vice president of the US to actually force every government agency to launch a website, right? But it's a one-way street. So the question isn't, will governments move to the cloud or not? I think that's an irrelevant question. That's happening. We're seeing that happen, amazing work happening in New South Wales, where I had the opportunity to go to Sydney and visit one of the New South Wales service centers. And what was phenomenal, and I think it's the model for the country to look at, is not only were they using cloud technologies to abstract government, they focused and put the citizen at the heart of government operations. So you literally walk in this service center and you're greeted by somebody and they're asking you, would you like a driver's license? Do you need a birth certificate? Do you need a healthcare card? That is the future of government. And the leadership in New South Wales is setting the example for the rest of Australia and, for that matter, the rest of the world. And what I'm excited about is the fact that when I went there, it wasn't just they changed and focused on technology, but they also focused on the customer experience. And one of the things they did, which I thought was really, really interesting, is they recruited people from the hospitality industry. So they went and recruited people from whether it was hotels or banks, and they made sure that as a citizen, when you walked in, your experience is not what most people would think of when they go into a government office, right? They characterize that as, well, we're waiting in line, I was holding on the phone, or they asked me to send in a 3-part fax, right? This was 21st century government at the same time using cloud technologies to simplify the citizen experience.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because that mentality could always have been there, and that ability to do that could always have been there. Government didn't have to be the way that it was, but it's taken really a fresh look at itself and been able to do that sort of customer service mentality and that focus that really is defining government now. Do you think that there's still a lot of people that are reluctant to do that, a lot of government organizations that are still struggling?
Well, it all begins with leadership, right? So I think the real lesson to learn is what about the leaders in New South Wales sets everybody else apart, right? Because ultimately what I'm super excited about is the fact that technology now isn't just in the province of the high-tech industry, but it's beginning to have a huge impact, whether it's elections, whether it's elected officials and how they're being held accountable for how their governments operate, right? In the United States, for example, whenever there's a snowstorm, mayors in any given city know that they must respond, right? In the past, because there wasn't as much transparency, there wasn't as much sort of a feedback loop, so they could get away with not plowing certain streets, right? And today, you can't. People are tweeting, they're on Facebook, they're sharing GPS-enabled pictures. So this amazing pressure where your customers are online holding you accountable, I think the same thing is going on. And I think what you're going to see is a set of leaders who are not responsive to their constituents are not going to be able to survive. And you're going to see people who are online, they're actually broadcasting their grievances, they're broadcasting their dreams and aspirations. They're going to hold these political leaders accountable. And I think the leaders in New South Wales have done a phenomenal job in terms of showing us the future, showing us what's possible. And I think it's incumbent upon everybody else to follow that leadership.
A lot of it is just about thinking differently, isn't it? The innovation, really figuring out ways that you can do things and revisit structures that you put in place. You have talked previously about breaking them down and building them up again. Is this a big ask for most government organizations?
Well, I would say that it's not just about thinking differently, right? Because governments around the world are littered with amazing strategies, right? I think ultimately it comes down to execution. And too often what happens is people in government overthink the problem. They overanalyze. They put together massive panels and committees on transforming customer service. It's not rocket science, right? Your citizens want to make sure that their experience when they're dealing with a government is not as arcane as it is today. They want to make sure that in the same way they can go online and order a book and it shows up, or make a reservation to their favorite restaurant, or buy a ticket to anywhere in the world in a matter of seconds. Why can't they have that experience with government services? They want to make sure when they walk into a government office, they're greeted, they're welcomed, and they don't have to be channeled through silos of bureaucracy. And that's not asking a lot, right? And I guarantee you, if you went to any government organization, they'll tell you they have a one-stop strategy, right? Well, great. Where's the execution? How do you make sure you deliver against that vision? And what I would say is, instead of having government officials write yet another strategy, they should go visit the New South Wales Service Center and learn from that and just replicate and execute it. Or they should go and visit the most compelling private sector organizations around customer service and close the technology gap.
Well, the answer to the question, why can't they do it, would have been 5 years ago, because we're the government. But obviously that doesn't fly anymore, as you're saying. But that said, there's still quite a large legislative framework, a lot of governance requirements. I mean, the government is under more scrutiny than ever. Can we reconcile this need to innovate and to treat people nicely and all these things that we don't associate with government? Can we reconcile that with the requirements around record keeping, for example, around sovereignty of your data, control of data, security, all these things that government is very acutely aware of, and still be able to drive that progress that we need to?
I think those are excuses that a lot of government officials will use, right? Because I remember every time we would push government agencies to execute, one of the things I used to say is no new budget and no new legislation. How do we deliver, right? It's sort of changing the way you approach the problem, because the easiest thing, and frankly in IT especially, what most CIOs are known as is Dr. No CIOs, because they say no to everything, right? Therefore, what you're seeing even in government is shadow IT in some cases is far greater than government IT, because government employees are going to other systems that are friendlier, that are operating, right, in a more efficient way than how government systems operate.
Certainly a lot of the early cloud companies have been very good beneficiaries of that. People just find things a little bit easier, and they want the control, and they want it now, basically, which is, I think, a problem that every CIO is facing in the public sector. So when you look back, obviously you're looking back at the government from a commercial role now, and you're talking with them as customers and as people who are trying to make this change. What advice do you offer them? And I guess, how would you draw on your experience as a CIO at basically the highest profile position that you could be as a public sector CIO, to really encourage them and motivate them to take that step and to move forward to the cloud, to open data, to all the things that really are required for the government to function better?
I would simply put it in terms of recognize why you're in the role you're in. You're there to make sure that the citizen is at the heart of government operations. And too many government leaders forget that. They forget who they work for. And I think it's very important to recognize that when you're a public servant, that if every decision you're making is in the interest of how do I optimize, simplify, improve the citizen experience, things will be a lot easier. People get caught up in the politics, they get caught up in legacy IT, they get caught up in things they don't need to be caught up in. I still remember one of the IT projects we were working on, and this was with the U.S. Customs and Immigration Service, right? And we basically said, well, why is it that when somebody applies for a visa or a green card, they don't know what their status is, right? They don't know if they're supposed to get a fingerprint, an interview, where they are in the processing cycle, what the average times are in terms of the next step that they can expect to hear back on. When you look at packaging companies or postal services like Australia Post or FedEx or U.S. Postal Service, they can tell you where your package is on a real-time basis. And the response was, well, we have this $1 billion IT project, and in 5 years, we'll be able to do that by just having a conversation with the agency and saying, no, you need to be able to deliver in 90 days. Focus on what your customers need, right? 90 days, what we're able to deliver is actually a solution that allowed anybody that had filed for a visa or a green card to be able to see on a real-time basis, where they were in the process. Not only that, but they could also see average processing times by field office, whether it was in New York or in Houston or in San Francisco. And that wasn't a function of spending more money or getting new legislation or worrying about security. It was a function of what is it that our customers want. And too many government agencies don't focus on that.
Thank you very much, Vivek. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.